Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple, and we've got an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed close to $4 million and counting towards pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1 million worth of aid to more than 1,500 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our many events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. And make sure, give a little selfish plug here on our podcast, make sure to follow us on YouTube, one, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. This is now we're going on 7 years of podcasting, which is kind of crazy. Over 300 plus guests, over 150,000 downloads or listens. I don't know. My marketing team tells me I can't say downloads, but I guess it's streams. But I think that makes us like the number one podcast in the pancreatic cancer space. I guess everybody has a podcast now, it seems like, but we've been doing this pretty long. But without further ado, let's meet our special guest here today, coming to us all the way from Lansing, Michigan, pancreatic cancer survivor, Lew Worthington. Welcome to the Project Purple podcast.
Thank you, Dana.
And I also want to add author. You are an author, so we're going to talk about that. So pancreatic cancer survivor and author. Can't wait to hear about that. And let's get started, Lew. So as I said before we hit record, the first segment of our podcast is always a guest opportunity to kind of share their journey, their experience with pancreatic cancer. So why don't we, for our audience, why don't we start, when did like your journey with pancreatic cancer start and how did it start?
Okay. The real crux of the issue for me began not with my cancer, but with somebody else's. So my family had just moved to Wisconsin. I took a position in a church there. And in the meantime, I also took a position in this town as the high school's head volleyball coach. I've been a volleyballer for a lot of years, and I was really looking forward to getting into the community by whatever means are good. And we had a player on our team who the previous year had been cut from the team because the year previous to that, she'd been diagnosed with brain cancer. And it breaks my heart to see somebody who is not able to fully live the normal life of a high schooler be really adversely affected by cancer. But she was trying to make a comeback. And so we had her on our team because she was the heart and soul of our team. She had a lot of spirit. Her body wasn't fully recovered. And yet we had her on the team because her knowledge, her enthusiasm, and her love of the sport and of her teammates was important to us. This was in the year of the COVID. And so trying to introduce myself to a young team while we are not allowed to touch the ball that somebody else touched was a difficult challenge, but still the main theme of the year was this young student athlete named Abby trying to battle cancer as she's trying to get her volleyball strength back up. And interestingly, during this COVID year, I spent part of my time in that area in Wisconsin and part of that time here in Lansing, which we still had, my wife's business was still here and we still had some property here. And it was in the winter of that year that I came back because our church work was completely online at that point. And I'd had this side ache for a number of years. My primary care physician told me a couple of years before that, let's just keep an eye on it because as you know, and probably everybody listening here knows, detection is insanely sneaky and difficult to do. And so we just kept an eye on it for a couple of years. And so I had an appointment while I was here with a GI doc. And the GI doc couldn't see anything, couldn't figure anything out. I had a follow-up appointment, and the PA there said, "Well, it might be irritable bowel syndrome, so let's check these things out." My wife actually suggested, "Can you do a scan of some kind?" And so the physician's assistant said, "Well, yeah, let's go ahead and schedule a CT scan just to make sure." And I remember those words, just to make sure there's nothing really bad going on.
Yeah.
This was the last part of November of that year, and we're sitting at our little residence here in Lansing on a Sunday night, and this thing comes into my patient portal, an email telling me that I have results from a test in the patient portal. And we opened it up and we looked, and we could not believe what it said, because it is late Sunday night and it says I have a soup can sized thing on my pancreas. And the first thing is shock. The second thing is the unrealistic hope that they got it wrong. And the following day, we had a sleepless night. The following day, we tried to contact the medical clinic that had conducted the test. And the person who answered the phone said, "Don't worry about it. If there was a problem, we would let you know."
Mm.
And we pressed. And she ended the conversation by saying, "If there was a problem, we will let you know." And she hung up on us. And fortunately, Jen's physician, who had not been my physician before, she called my wife called her physician, and she arranged for somebody a little more proactive to look at my chart. And it eventually led to an appointment with an oncologist, who then took the case. And that part happened pretty quickly and pretty, I think, professionally and caringly and responsibly. But needless to say, we severed our client-patient relationship with that initial clinic that conducted the scan. And so all of a sudden, I find out in my initial appointment, I'll never forget the words my oncologist said, "Well, I'm an oncologist, and the reason you're seeing an oncologist is because you have cancer." And it was something, there was a sense of care and concern in his voice, and yet it seemed as if it was, unfortunately for him, well practiced, because I don't understand why somebody would go into oncology, because it is such a sad thing, so often. I mean, I know maybe the good side is sometimes you see success stories out of it, but sometimes you don't. But he was caring and compassionate, but obviously very well rehearsed in his words to me. And so at that point, we start laying out a plan of care. And initially, because of the size and how advanced it was, and eventually we learned that it was stage 4, that I had, maybe 6 months to live. And we started talking about, maybe we could have some kind of trip that we wanted to take always before time is up. And my doctor said, "Don't schedule that. You're not going to have time." They put me on FOLFIRINOX, and the effects of that were so radically life-altering that my appetite went way down. My ability to taste food, to process food, really affected my ability to do anything. So any kind of trip that we might have wanted to do would not have been much fun. I mean, for me, and I don't travel a lot, but any kind of travel is going to involve probably some participation in the food of that culture. And when you can't taste it, what fun is it, right?
So Lou, I just want to jump in here. So when you
Yeah.
And I have a saying on the podcast of loaded, and all my
Mhm.
questions are loaded. There's no not loaded, which and loaded means like they're thought provoking in the sense that it's just gonna maybe think about it a little bit. But then also, I mean, hindsight's always 2020 too. We say that a lot on the podcast. So
Yep.
now what you know, just pausing here for a second, and I'm sure this is like one of the things for our listeners, just to go back. So you, symptomatically, prior to any of this, it was just this side ache that just was this like, was it ebbing and flowing? Like it would, that when you say side ache, first thing is like just that dull pain, like maybe like you moved a certain way or, being a volleyball coach, maybe, doing a drill and you're like, oh man, I think I like slipped a disc or pulled an abdominal, an adductor or something. That's one, but then also two, would this like come and go through the years? You kind of said,
It's a really good question because I remember my initial experience with this little side pain, and it was very little. I want to emphasize that very little. And I'm sitting there at home, and I'm kind of like poking my side to see if I could aggravate it any.
yeah,
And the closest thing I can describe it to, I mean, you run some, right?
yeah,
That you drink a lot of water and then you start running without the water completely. But that's more severe than what I was feeling. But
yeah.
just a little kind of side ache. And the thing of it is, in the next couple of years, up to the point where I had my first CT scan, um, it didn't progress much beyond that. So it was still
Yeah,
just kind of every now and then it felt like somebody was, on the inside with a tiny little pin poking me right there.
like a side stitch almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was there was nothing dietary, like digestively, um,
No,
eating, like sleep,
no.
stress.
There was one thing, and I don't know if it's related or not.
Uh-huh.
But I remember my wife was, and this was when I was in Wisconsin, my wife was on a trip here to Lansing, and she took our son because he was doing school, but it was online. And so I had this, I was in the house all by myself, and I woke up one morning and it was like really severe vertigo. I had never experienced that ever before that. And I had experienced that maybe 5 or 6 times after that between then and a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
I don't know if, and I'm not a medical professional, I don't know of any
Yeah.
correlation between the two, but it was very severe. And, to make the conclusion to my story a little nearer, I've been in remission since remission. I haven't experienced that vertigo-like sensation since.
Huh.
Is there a correlation there? I have no idea.
Yeah, I've never heard vertigo. That's an interesting one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've had hundreds of people on the podcast, and
Mhm.
I think that in where where I wanted to go with this, Lou, is it's just fascinating because I know you said, with the advancements and, with treatment protocols, early detection, there really isn't any early detection. I mean, we're on
Right.
a rapid mission to try to change that. But like, yeah, it's like the side ache is just that's like, I mean, we've had people talk about like these aches and pains, right? But aches and pains, I mean, like we said, you could have reached and grabbed a volleyball or hit a volleyball and strained an adductor, right?
Yeah.
Or, you could just move funny and you could slip a disc and that could cause, pain somewhere in that midsection. So to just and that's the other piece of this too. We just want to be careful because there's, like anyone who has stomach pain or abdominal pain doesn't necessarily mean that it's pancreatic cancer. But I think to kudos to your wife to advocate and press to get some sort of scan so that you can, rule that out. And I think that's the one thing that we've seen, is yeah, you got to really advocate and you got to push for that so that scan isn't super evasive and it's enough to where I think it needs to be done in these cases where there's this vagueness and you could just check the box and then kind of move on.
That seems to make a lot of sense, especially since
Well, common sense doesn't always come into the medical field.
no, that's true. Well, even for the blood tests,
Yeah.
had blood tests done, and they were always so good. And I was almost like something I was proud of because my blood was always good. Why not do the CA 19-9 test as a matter of course? When
Well, the CA 19-9, we've had discussion with some medical professionals on that, and that's kind of like another gray area where like if you don't have cancer, what I was told, if you don't have cancer present, then the CA 19-9 really doesn't express anything. It's like kind of a waste of a test. And I know like in the medical field, but that's kind of the nihilism. This is a little bit of we're digressing here a little bit. The
right,
medical system, the system is so large, right? And they
I
do
understand.
things in certain ways. It's kind of like the insurance panels, right? Like we just had someone reach out to us and they want to get on a clinical trial, but insurance won't pay for the clinical trial till they finish two more rounds of chemo. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, so the two rounds of chemo, they're eligible now, but they can't get on the trial, even though they're eligible. Insurance will pay for it because they got to finish out chemo, but the chemo may eliminate them from the clinical trial by the time
That's
they get on the
22.
trial, right? So it's like it doesn't make it's counterproductive, right?
Right,
And so
yeah.
this is the systems that are in place that so like that CA 19-9, like I don't know if it's an insurance thing or what the system is, but it's a fascinating, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of false positives where the numbers can be high
Yeah.
for other reasons,
Yeah.
pancreatitis or whatever.
Yeah. So
But
they,
if there's any kind of hint that,
it's frustrating, Lou. It's
yeah,
very frustrating as patient advocates because I feel, and this is the other piece, it sounds like you and your wife realized, okay, we got to go elsewhere, and you found someone good and you got into treatment right away. But a lot of people kind of go on this hamster wheel of healthcare in
yeah,
this country. And that's good and bad. If there was a public health system, would that be different? Possibly, but access to that might be months to get into the right person or so it's this like there's this it's a very interesting, again, it could be like a whole series of podcasts about that because it's fascinating. I do believe we have a great healthcare system here in the United States for people who have access to it and people who can get access to certain doctors, but for other people, it's a real challenge. But it
well,
comparatively to like Canada, and we've had people on the podcast from Canada, we have people from the UK, and they just struggle to get basic
mm,
cancer care, and have to jump through a lot of hoops. So I still believe it's better here than it is elsewhere in the world, but it's still not where it needs to be.
yeah, it's an interesting intersection between the amazing technology that's out there and the social side of things. And
Yeah,
if we could bring care into the lives of people who need it without fail, then the social issue would. I mean, there is
yeah,
probably no social situation that would solve that perfectly at this point.
no,
But and here's I love what you do because at some point, um, okay, let me be unrealistically optimistic. But in my life, I'll look back and say, oh, wow, in 2025, wasn't cancer treatment really primitive compared to what it is now? But this, the statistics that have always been quite dire for pancreatic cancer patients, they are getting better, right?
you want to go down that rabbit hole?
No, I don't. But I mean,
No, the statistics. I just on the statistics thing. For those watching and listening, have heard me. I think the statistics are baked. I honestly do. I think, and this is my personal opinion. I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything. And I've asked some really, really smart people, where do these numbers come from? Because I have met, and this is optimism. I've met so many stage four survivors in the last like 8 years that are still living, and some of them are living really, really high quality life.
mm,
Life's not like it was before they got sick, but they're still alive and they're still able to function. I think the survival numbers. off a bit. And I don't say like 10, I'm not talking 10, 20%, but I think this like 5%. Like I think the number's a little bit higher. I also feel too, I think there's a lot more young people in the last like 4 years that have been getting this disease. And we've talked about that on the podcast. And I know there's some data behind females, but there are a lot, and I don't know if it's just because we have this medium of the podcast, but we've interviewed a lot of young people in the last like 4 years since COVID, that have been diagnosed with the disease. So I feel a little bit is the podcast and the popularity of people wanting to share their journeys. But I do believe that there are a lot of younger people getting this disease, and not teenagers, but there's people in their 40s and their 30s,
Mhm.
some in their late 20s, that are getting the disease that I think, and that's an awareness piece. And again, maybe it's just because of the popularity of the podcast, but those two pieces, I feel like statistically, like when you look at the big numbers that ACS, and this is not a blame on ACS, I just have never been able, which is American Cancer Society, they put out that cancer fact sheet every year. I just haven't been able to get my hands on the real data of where they're getting that data. Maybe some of it's like actuarially that they look at like from a big data project, but again, another podcast. I want to get back to your story here.
Right.
As you guys, so you start your treatment and you start right away, you say, right? Like, so you go
Yeah.
right into treatment, you get we call the kitchen sink, the fullerenox, which is super, super toxic, and a lot of people do not do well on it. So how does it go for you?
I remember as soon as they start pumping that stuff into me, the ends of my extremities start feeling tingly and then numb. And one of the I don't want to oversimplify things, but one of the ongoing results of that, in addition to the effectiveness it had on the bad tissue, is that I still have some level of neuropathy, especially in my feet.
Mhm.
And but that was, I remember coming home. It was in the dead of a cold winter, and I go home and I try to wash my hands in the sink, and room temperature water was just painfully cold. And so there was a lot to manage there and to try to navigate around to live normal life, trying to rinse my mouth out. I could feel the tingling, painful needle-like experience in my mouth too. But long term, it was just really killing my ability to taste food. And without an appetite, it's amazing how biological hunger is rather than just, oh, I like food and I'm going to eat. Without that ability to taste, even if it's not an enjoyment, just the ability to taste food is so instrumental in just supplying stuff for your body. And so I was on a quest all the time to try to find food that I could taste. And then because my digestive system was starting not to work, they gave me the brat diet,
Mhm.
which it was like taking blandness to a whole new level. But the one thing that I eventually happened upon that I could actually taste were things with vinegar in it. Pickles, sauerkraut, spinach with vinegar on it. And the problem is that there's not a lot of caloric content there.
You eat like 3 jars of pickles just to make like 200 calories. I
Yeah,
think their pickles are like 10 calories a piece, I think. Like it's like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And spinach itself,
Yeah.
it, and my wife said, "Here, let me buy some fresh spinach and cook it up." I said, "No, just a can. That's fine. I don't
Yeah.
care about the spinach. I just want the vinegar so I can taste it."
Yeah.
And, it was one of those things that I could count on always generated a reaction on my taste buds.
So how many rounds of chemo do you do?
I don't even remember honestly, but it was like early spring. I had gotten down to, I'd lost like 50 pounds. And I'll never forget one of the things that happened is
And this is spring of 21, right? So you get,
yes,
because it
yes,
was
thank you.
November 20.
Yep,
Yep.
yep, yep. Yeah, I had a hospice care nurse come in, and I've always been fairly athletic. My legs were always pretty sturdy, and yet my knees bulged out so much farther than my upper leg or lower leg that it made me look um, unwell because, well,
Yeah.
I was. And I'll never forget what she said. I said, I've lost so much weight, and I don't know how much longer I can sustain at this rate of weight loss. I don't think she meant it, but she said something like, well, you can lose a lot more weight, still keep going. And I didn't want to hear that. The image that it created in my brain was not a happy one. But at the end of all of that, they took me off of the FOLFIRINOX, and one of the things they decided to do was targeted radiation. Then it had been effective though, which was the good news,
The
and the
chemotherapy.
chemo was effective, and so it went from size of a soup can to something that they could manage with some radiation,
Wow.
and I think that was in May of that year that we were scheduling it. I had to go in, like, get measured, and really kind of a funny thing. They do this
They map out
they
everything,
map it
right?
out,
Yeah.
and then they put a tattoo, a little dot
Yeah. Yeah. The little dot. Yeah.
and I had to sign a release form that said, I'm not going to come after you because of these tattoos. I'm like,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
cares? I mean,
Yeah.
who cares? The people that conducted that were so kind. I will
Yeah.
always remember how kind they were, because I was so embarrassed that, even getting up on that table to put myself on my back, I kept trying to apologize for not having the strength to do that. And they were
Yeah.
just so comforting and so good. And because they can't have electronics on my head, but they provided some music, and what kind of music would you like? And then, oh, I know. So I'm a big classical music nut, and I wanted to listen to the symphonies of Gustav Mahler. And so I'm listening to those. It's not great sound quality, but I'll never forget the experience. While
Yeah.
I'm supposed to expel all the air and hold for a long time, kind of focusing on music while I'm doing that radiation
Yeah.
was something that was not all that impossible to do.
So you get through the targeted therapy, the radiation, and did you go for like 4 weeks, or what was your schedule like? Like,
Yeah,
I know usually
yeah,
it
it was.
depends.
Yeah, I can't. Again, and I apologize the
No, it's
details.
okay.
And a lot of this I know I don't want to remember.
Yeah, no, I
So there's
understand.
probably some kind of psychological resistance to keeping those things in my brain.
So you get through the targeted radiation, and then
Mhm.
what happens from there?
So in July uh, of 21,
Uh-huh.
I had we did a PET scan at the end of all that, and I was diagnosed as no evidence of disease.
Wow. So you went from November 2020 scan, stage 4, to now less than a year, right? July
Yeah,
21
yeah, yeah,
to NED.
yep,
And that was from chemotherapy and from targeted radiation.
yep, yeah.
Wow. So after the 21st, July 21, any treatments, anything?
Well, things are okay, and we decided to there's an interesting footnote to this whole cancer thing, because we decided to take a trip pretty much on
Yeah.
a whim.
I was going to say probably went on that trip that you told not to.
Well, no, it was within the country.
Yeah.
So again, Gustav Mahler comes up again, because we find out that uh, my wife's favorite conductor, not because of the fact that he's a great conductor, but he is, but because
Uh,
he is such positive influence on people, Ben Zander in Boston was conducting Gustav Mahler. So on a whim, we decided to fly out to Boston.
Cool.
And this was the week before Thanksgiving. We enjoy that trip. We come back. And the day before Thanksgiving, I tell my wife, oh, I've got this bad pain in my gut, really, really bad. And, I kind of want to dismiss it as being, I don't know, bad beans or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if it's because my face was ashen white or whatever, but she called the ambulance and they took me, and it turns out that a hole had ruptured in my stomach.
Oh my God.
And I had said before, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know how dire that situation is. They Again, because of all the COVID restrictions, there were people lined up in the hallway trying to get
Yeah.
treated, and they were short on staff. It is a weird thing to be in an echoey hallway in a hospital and then involuntarily yell out a groan in pain and hear it echo off the walls.
Yeah.
And but that was what was happening. And the doctor eventually, after a scan, the doctor that was on duty there eventually came back, and I remember she apologized to me. She says, "I'm so sorry, you have a hole in your stomach." And I'm thinking, okay, no problem. We know what
No
it
big
is.
deal. I just went through pancreatic cancer.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and fix it and move on. Well, she offered surgery as an option, or we can just make sure you don't eat or drink anything and it might close on its own. And I remember she said it might close on its own. And I said, well, what are the chances of that? Well, 50-50 or so. What she didn't know at the time is that I had just had the targeted radiation and that I was not a candidate for surgery. And so she was hoping that she could keep me alive long enough so that my family could come and say goodbye. And this was the day before Thanksgiving, and I couldn't eat or drink anything. By Friday, they did another scan, and it had closed on its own.
Wow.
By Saturday, I walked out of the hospital. In fact, it was almost a symbolic thing. I didn't want the wheelchair that is customarily offered.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to walk. And yeah, and I did not realize how close to death they were all talking about.
Yeah.
And and I think this word is probably thrown out without a lot of thought about what it actually means. But a couple of the nurses there had said, "Oh, this is a miracle. You're going to die." And I don't know if, I don't know how much miracle even applies or even what that means in this context, but it was a statistical anomaly that I was able to walk out so soon after that.
So since that scans, nothing, everything's been copacetic.
Nope. So the next year, and so I'm living my life, really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I have some digestive issues.
Yeah.
I have the neuropathy.
The neuropathy. I know you
Yeah.
mentioned that.
But I noticed that there was some swelling in my legs and what's the edema from? Let's have another scan, and we find out that there is a recurrence of cancer in lymph nodes, possibly some other places. And so another scan, and this was in the fall of 2023. They could not give me FOLFIRINOX again.
Uh-huh.
So let's put you on chemo. And this time it's the Gemzar
Abraxane.
Abraxane. Yep. And so we tried that for I can't remember, 2 or 3 treatments, and it did not do anything positive. It made me bald, and there were some small other little side effects, but it didn't do anything at all. So they said, well, let's do immunotherapy. what I did not know at the time is, well, what I did know at the time is that I am a Lynch syndrome patient.
Well, that's one of my questions here. So I was going to say genetics here, but so Lynch syndrome. When did that diagnose, or when did that come out?
That came out really early on.
Okay, so they knew from early on that you had Lynch syndrome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I did not know how effective uh, Keytruda was
Yeah,
for Lynch patients.
yeah.
I am not sure. I had it explained to me, but I'm not sure why that wasn't tried first of all. But however it worked out, it did work out maybe favorably. And I've been on that for since the late fall of 23.
So at that point in 23, they try the Gemzar Abraxane. They realize Lynch syndrome, Keytruda. You go on Keytruda, and now you've been active. So you're still on Keytruda,
Mhm.
but life has been good.
Life has been good. Because of the diagnosis, I started my retirement earlier than I wanted to.
Yeah.
And the I'm very active. I play tennis 3 or 4 times a week. I golf during the summer as often as I can.
Yeah.
I was coaching volleyball for a while. As active, doing things useful as they can be, and I wrote a book.
So let's talk about the book. What was the inspiration behind the book?
Originally, when I was going through my first treatment, I have an older son that was living in Dallas at the time, and he gave me uh, some hardcover diary kind of thing where I was supposed to write some final thoughts or something like that. And that wasn't me. I mean, I'm not going to do that. But somewhere along the journey, especially when it looked like the treatments were going pretty well, there were several people in my life, like Rick, my neighbor next door, people within my family, my wife Jen, saying you should write about this. Even the woman that was my wife's primary care physician, now she is mine as well. She said, "Oh, I'm probably never going to have another patient that is as successful with pancreatic cancer as you are. You should write about it." And so, with all this input, um, I decided to do that.
Awesome.
Um, so I worked on it for a while before the recurrence came. And when I got that diagnosis, I didn't know how it was going to end. So I didn't write a thing for like 6 months because I didn't know, you know, I'm not saying I have to have closure in a
Yeah.
narrative, but I didn't know how to leave it open or not. And so I left off writing for about a half a year. But then, finished it, early or late winter this year.
So does the book chronicle your journey,
Yes.
Lou? Or okay.
Yep. Yep.
So it's really kind of like an autobiography about
It is.
your experience with the disease.
Yeah. And beyond just telling the story, it there's some philosophical and some personal and some theological reflection on what some of this stuff means.
Yeah.
Um, and so my attempt though was not to, the name of the book is Unlikely Hope.
Yeah.
I don't want to give any false impressions. I don't want to say, well, gosh, I had a lot of pickles. Pickles are the cure. I don't want to give any unreasonable expectation like that. In fact, at one point we considered putting a jar of pickles on the cover because that was so important to my life at that point. But I didn't
Yeah.
want people to get the idea that, oh yeah, this is the cure.
Pickles are the way to go.
Yeah, and I don't paint a rosy picture, but rather one that is full of the meaning of life in the process of dying from this stupid disease. Um, so yeah, I think it's a pretty good book. I think the writing is all right.
I love it. I mean, I think anytime this space deserves all the attention that it can get, and I think when patients, advocates, clinicians do things in a public forum to raise awareness, I think that we need more of it. So that's why I was kind of excited to have you on the podcast to hear not only hear your story but also talk about the book. Um, I've got a couple questions for you here.
Mhm.
You mentioned um, religion, and
Mhm.
that's a subject we often talk about, we often hear about. I know you mentioned in the beginning, but what part has faith had for you in this journey? Like, how has that played into it?
That's of course, a very important question for me because, as a former pastor, as a professor at a seminary, those kind of questions are always on my mind, even
Yeah.
when not experiencing cancer. One of the things that I talk about in the book is that as soon as I found out my diagnosis, some other well-known people in my life with a national reputation within the faith community had also experienced it.
The
And
gentleman from New York who had a
I'm
big
sorry?
the gentleman from New York who had a big congregation. I can't think
Yeah,
of his last name. Tim something
Keller.
Keller. Yeah.
Yep, yep, yeah. And he talks about how, he talks about how all of a sudden colors seem brighter. And he said, even sex seems better. For me, it was not the case. He talks about how he can't wait to see his sweet Jesus. And that, I have at the time, I mean, he's 13 now, but I had a pre adolescent son that I absolutely adored. And I couldn't imagine, I didn't want him to grow up without me in his life. We are very close. And all of this. So I'm trying to figure out what my faith means in this context. I don't think faith for me only means some kind of hope in the afterlife. But one of the significant parts is that the people around me, and sometimes they were not people within my faith community, sometimes they were in the greater faith community, some of my tennis buddies that haven't darkened a congregational door in decades offered support and encouragement. And so that was a very meaningful part to me, that support, that love and care, uh, very, very important to me. But it was also important for me as I go along that I don't change who I am um, in terms of my faith. I I went through a divorce a decade and a half ago, and it was the worst experience of my life emotionally. And I was angry. I was angry with God. I was angry with myself. And when this happened, I just really, and I don't talk about this much, but I felt the presence of God in a way that didn't seem to be such a factor during the divorce.
Mm.
And there was a sense of comfort there. I didn't, you know, there's always the question, why? Why? And I talk about this in the book that I had quit asking the why question because it seems so pointless. And maybe I have grown enough to get beyond the why question and just say, here's the situation, let's move on. Understanding that God will be with me, even if the outcome isn't the most desired outcome. And so, that was one of the things that always came back to me. But trying to discipline myself not to ask the why question also came back when the treatment started working in ways that were unexpectedly good.
Mhm.
I was embarrassed because I wanted to ask the why question again, but in the other way. Why is this working for me? And there's so many great people out there for whom it does not work. And, there's almost, and I don't want to overstate this, but there's almost a sense of guilt about that. My volleyball student, Abby, why didn't treatments work for her? She eventually passed. And that's really where the book begins, when I find out about her passing. And why couldn't things have been effective for her and let her at least live the rest of her high school years out? So it's a complex issue, that why question, but I try not to question that kind of thing too much.
I think it's normal though,
Yeah.
Lou, because I think as human beings, we always need the answer to everything. And I think something that I heard you say, it seemed like, and we talk about it often with survivors, is that acceptance piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you allow yourself to accept what has happened and having a higher calling, regardless of your faith, Judaism, Buddhism, Catholicism, wherever you want to go, Islam, and you have that belief system and you have that acceptance. I think it's a powerful statement to have. But I also feel like society, that's the other piece of this, is like almost like with the medical system, right? Societal norms are like, we need to know the answer for every reason on why things happen.
Yeah.
But if we accept that things just happen and we move forward in that, and this is where I come back. I know we talked a little bit about the data. I think this community is so hell-bent on data. But I think the data, again, I think there's like some misconceptions about data. And this is what I love about bringing, listen, you're a stage 4 pancreatic cancer survivor from 2020. Like, you statistically should be not here, right? Like, let's just put it out there, right? But you are. And so people listening on the other side, whether they're, day one or, day 1,000 in their journey, like, they're still here and you're still here. And that's the other piece to this, is like, not to segue, but I think like this, again, as a patient advocate, we have this really bad thing that we do in all cancers, is like talk about survivor. Like, how we define survivor is like, you got to be 5 years, it seems like, or you got to be out of treatment. You're a survivor day one.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're surviving. Like, no one, you're alive. Now, hey, can you go run a marathon? No, probably not. But people have done it though. Like, that, it's not unfathomable, but not a lot of people who do chemotherapy can run a marathon. It just doesn't work that way. But you're still surviving, you're still alive. And I think that's something that I don't know if it's one term that I say, and I'm just going to pause here for a second. We put our blinders on here. We worry about the impact and the things that we can do and the things that we say. And I think, like, I do believe that, just like anytime there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of profiteering, I guess you would say, where people have to lead with doom and gloom. There's a seriousness to this, but everybody who's diagnosed, I've never met anyone diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 15 years that doesn't understand the seriousness. I've never had to explain the seriousness of this diagnosis to someone. So, like, to reiterate that and to tell people statistics that may or may not be applicable to them, I don't think is fair, in my opinion, as a community advocate. I think the fairest thing is to share journeys and stories and how we can support and how we can get people to where you are, and other people that are in this space that have had positive results because of their faith, because of the things they've done, because of their support systems. That's where I like to focus, but I think society has this really warped way of just pushing people into those verticals of, like, statistics are this. Yes, statistics are important, but if we're finding more and more people at stage 4 that are living really longer than statistically that we know, then us as patient advocates, we're doing a disservice to share and to not, I guess, to not share that information. And that's what I love about this podcast. So I appreciate you, speaking on faith, because I think that is something that is really, really critical. Again, we've interviewed a lot of survivors, and there's always a couple tenets with that, that we see people kind of go this direction with survivability and fighting this cancer, and faith is one of them. Um, I got two questions left for you, and then we're gonna share where people can connect and hopefully buy your book and learn more about your book and your journey. This is a loaded question. Given what you've gone through, what you go through daily now, and it could be multiple answers here. What advice would you give someone who just got diagnosed today with pancreatic cancer? What would be Lou's advice, or Lou's things to kind of to do or to follow through with?
Okay. Almost a disclaimer to begin with. I know a lot of people want to encourage, being brave, and I think almost everybody who does this, I mean, you're forced into that bravery. It's going to be part of your experience because you don't have any choice. But for me, and you talked about the statistics, and sometimes the statistics are demoralizingly dire. One of the things I talk about in the book is how hope is both a statistical and an emotional thing. And one of the lines I quote, I think it's Lloyd in the movie Dumb or Dumber, and the real goofy guy comes up to this beautiful woman and asks if he has a chance, and she sarcastically says something like 1 in 2 million or something, and then he goes, "Oh, you mean I have a chance?" I clung to that. The fact that the likelihood, the probabilities were not favorable, were almost irrelevant. I wanted some level of hope, something to look forward to that might turn out favorably. So to me, that kind of advice is cling to whatever forms of hope are available. And sometimes that hope is offered in, family, communities of faith, friendships, and a lot of people are able to get behind us when we're suffering like that. And sometimes friendships develop that would not have developed before because people generally really want to be compassionate. And yeah, so I think that clinging to hope when it's available was important to me, and that's what I would maybe offer as a bit of advice.
Powerful. Last question here, and always the loaded of the loaded questions that we have on the podcast. Given your experience, what you've gone through, what is Lou's definition of pancreatic cancer? How do you define it?
Oh, yeah. And so I take
And
it.
there's no right or wrong to this. This is
Yeah,
your
yeah.
definition.
Yeah, you are not asking for a medical definition, but the experiential definition, right? What is that experience? It is, I have not experienced other forms of deadly disease. For me, the thing that bothered me most is how it sneaks in and invades your body and it doesn't belong there. It isn't invited, and it's like an evil, unwanted intruder. And its influence is way too strong. And through your efforts to raise money for research, I hope that narrative can change, where we can find ways to detect it earlier and deal with it in ways that are better. But that to me was the most sinister side of it, where it's not invited, it comes into my body, and my body's integrity is invaded, and by this phenomenon that nobody likes.
Perfect. Lou, thank you for allowing us to share your journey with pancreatic cancer. Thank you for doing what you're doing with your book. on that, where's the best place? So for our audience watching or listening, if they want to connect with you, maybe learn more about your story, buy your book.
It is available on Amazon. And it is also, I have a website, lewworthington.com. That's LEWWORTHINGTON.com. And, if you want to contact me, Lou at lewworthington.com. And, it's, I get emails every now and then, and people talk about, their brother or their, somebody else they're related to. And it is hard to resist wanting to say something that fixes everything or that makes them feel better. But I know that that is probably not going to work. So, but I am always willing to offer whatever compassion I can. But again, this is something that so many of us are in it together. And like I said before, I think people are really wanting to be compassionate to sufferers of this pancreatic cancer menace. But that, anyway, to answer your question directly, that's where a good place to get in touch with me.
Well, Lou, thank you again for being a guest, for sharing your journey, and again for all you're doing for the community. And I do agree with you. I think people want to connect, but I also will leave you with this. This disease is strength in numbers, and the more people that we engage, the more people we build, the bigger the team becomes, the more success we'll have at beating this thing.
Yep,
So
good,
thank you
good.
for being on the podcast and
Thank
for
you.
sharing your journey.